My name is John Westell. I joined the Royal Canadian Navy in 1940 and served in the war until 1945 on my release.
You were born and raised where, John?
In the Kincardine Lighthouse.
You were born and raised in the lighthouse?
In the lighthouse, yes.
How so? What do you mean?
Well, it made a natural for the Navy, didn't it?
What was your father?
Father was the lighthouse keeper. Yeah.
It must have been quite an experience for a child to grow up in a lighthouse.
It was. Always something new. Not very adventuresome, but always something new. A great way especially for a boy to grow up. We realized we were probably the luckiest kids in town, but to have a place like that to live, and especially in the dirty 30s.
How old were you in 1940?
I was 20 in 1940.
When you joined up?
When I joined up, yeah.
And what prompted you to join up? Just the war effort?
Not really. I had always wanted to go to sea. I had my own boat in Kincardine, and living in a lighthouse, it was a natural thing. At the time, I was working in the local theater as the projectionist, which wasn't a very exciting occupation. So, a bit of both. Loyalty and desire to go to sea.
Where did you go to join?
I tried both places, London and Toronto, but this was early in the war, and their facilities for training were practically nil. So they just weren't taking people. So I finally had to go to Toronto, take a temporary job, and be a Saturday night sailor until they had room for us in Halifax at the signal school. So there we are.
And how long then were you in Toronto?
Just through the summer. Arrived in Halifax 2 days after Christmas, and the course finished in May. The new corvettes were just coming downriver from Montreal and Quebec City, wherever. My particular ship, the Dauphin, Manitoba, she in the first week of May.
42.
Yeah, no, this is 41.
What were you being trained to do? Was it just basic kind of seamanship?
As a radio operator, which meant learning the Morse code and all the books, some technical. It was just a short course, just because the ships were there waiting for us.
Do you remember when you first laid eyes on that ship?
She was alongside in Halifax Harbor. There would be 3 or 4 other corvettes came down the river with her same time. Some of them possibly from Collingwood.
Brand new, though.
Brand spanking new.
Quite a sight, I guess.
Yeah, it was. And we were all brand spanking new sailors, too, with the exception of some of the chief engineers. And our captain was a former RCMP Marine section. So he did have some sea time.
And what was his name?
McNeil. Robert Angus Sutherland McNeil.
On a corvette, a crew of about how many?
At that time, it would be about 60. It increased as we put more equipment on board and got the men to man it. We'd had neither prior to that. It was what you might call bare bones. For the first few weeks, we were on local escort, picking the ships that were coming up the Atlantic coast, bound for the the Newfoundland escort.
I've always thought it must have been a tremendous organizational exercise to get those convoys in order.
It was indeed, because if you take a convoy from, well, the size of a convoy would vary from between 40 and 60 ships. That's a lot of ships to organize and each ship's captain is very, very independent. He's been used to just controlling his one ship. Now he's taking orders from people he's never seen and probably will never see.
Were there accidents? Collisions?
Oh yes, yes there were. We then transferred our base from Sydney to St. John's. We were now part of the Deep Sea Group. In September, I even remember the date, September the 2nd, 41, our first. And we went directly to Londonderry on that trip, which was much better. Is much better for us, those of us who were seasick, because you weren't at sea long enough to really become acclimatized. When we started going all the way across, it was like magic. You were a seaman.
And with a convoy of that size, how many escort ships would there be?
In 40, or in 41 rather, there would be 4 or 5. It's a pretty skimpy protection but we just didn't have them.
And you were on a Corvette.
Corvette.
Other Corvettes? And
Sometimes your senior officer would be in a destroyer, sometimes a Corvette.
So that first trip, then you're in Londonderry for a few days?
Just long enough to restore, refuel, and usually about 3 days.
And then back you go.
Back you go, pick up another convoy, which was usually coming out of being assembled in the either the North Sea or the Irish Sea.
And all this time you're a radio operator.
Yes.
What's that involve? If there's a radio room?
The radio room on a Corvette is almost part of the wheelhouse. It's just a small room adjacent to the wheelhouse. And that was home when you were on watch.
Would there be different codes for different
That's right,
days?
yeah.
Or
Naval code, naval cipher, fleet code, fleet cipher, and so forth. And initially, we didn't have coders either. It wasn't for about almost another year before we had coders. So we had to decode all the stuff we had just received as well.
And those messages mostly would have been, say, directing you headings and things.
Well, for instance, if they had word from other sources that there was U-boat activity ahead of you, the convoy would be diverted south or north, or that's what most of them were. The U-boat disposition reports.
You're